Alright, hi everyone, how's it going? And welcome to another video. Now recently Johnny Depp has been in the news a lot lately, and it got me thinking a lot about Johnny Depp's career. I was thinking about the first movie he had ever done. The first movie he had ever done was A Nightmare on Elm Street. And that is what I'm going to do this video on. It's going to be a movie review of Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm going to talk about the people who made it. I'm going to talk about some stories involved in it and the production. But right here, this is one of the more recent posters for A Nightmare on Elm Street. This one right here, one of the more recent posters that had come. And I remember when it came out in the theaters, there was a different poster, and I remember the one that was on the cover of the VHS tape. Now, I first saw this film back in 1986. We had gone into the video store, and my mom asked the owner if there was a good horror film or a monster movie to rent. He pointed to A Nightmare on Elm Street, and he said, "This is the best horror film I've seen all year." So he rented that. I watched it, and I thought it was a well-made film. Now, it's not my favorite slasher film of all time or favorite horror film. My favorite horror film of all time is John Carpenter's Halloween, 1978. But for slasher films, Nightmare on Elm Street would be second. Nightmare on Elm Street would be number 2, in my opinion. And I do want to talk about these films and, the production. I think the best place to start would be to talk about the person who made the film, Wes Craven. Now, Wes Craven was a college professor. He had come from a very strict religious background. He had a strict religious upbringing. He was only allowed to see one movie a year, and it had to be a Disney movie. And then Wes Craven became a college professor, but then he wanted to make movies. Wes Craven wanted to make movies, so he had gotten a job at some production company, then quit that job because he wasn't really allowed to make movies with this. Then he got another job working someplace else, and he then had an opportunity to make a film. He made his first film, which was Last House on the Left, in 1972. And when that film came out, it was considered kind of like a grindhouse film. It was considered very shocking and disturbing. People wanted to destroy this film. They wanted to find the original copy and, just like I said, destroy the film. However, there were also a lot of people who wanted to see it as well. So then, after this, Wes Craven, who didn't want to just do horror, he also wanted to do comedies. He wrote some comedies, but no studio was interested in making any of these comedies into a film. They wanted a horror film. So 5 years later, in 1977, he came out with his second film, which was The Hills Have Eyes. Now, as far as I know, The Hills Have Eyes was pretty well received. It did pretty well. He then did another one called Deadly Blessings, which I have not seen, but I know it has Sharon Stone in it in one of her first roles. He also did another movie. It was a made-for-TV movie with Linda Blair that I saw recently that I really liked, or thought was pretty good. Then, let's see, after that, he then did The Hills Have Eyes 2, which is considered to be one of his worst films ever made. And I know he also made Swamp Thing. I believe he did Swamp Thing before Hills Have Eyes too. But he had done Swamp Thing, and Swamp Thing did not do so well because it was a low-budget superhero film. I think with a horror movie, you could make a horror movie, and you got a shot of that horror film doing well. You have a shot, because there have been films that have been made, horror films, that were very inexpensive to make, but they ended up doing really well at the box office. But superhero films, it seems like you need a bigger budget with those. And Swamp Thing was a superhero film. It didn't do well. because of, like what I said, low budget superhero film. Because there were superhero films that were made in the 70s that were low budget that never went anywhere, that people are unaware of. There was a Doctor Strange movie that came out in the 70s. There were Spider-Man movies that came out back then. There were Captain America movies, or at least a Captain America movie that came out. And you don't really hear about these films. These were lower budget movies, and they're pretty much completely forgotten today. But anyways, Swamp Thing bombed, and however, I am told, I believe it did start to do better when it was on video. So then Wes Craven then began work on his next film, which was A Nightmare on Elm Street. It started writing the script in 1981. Now, I want to talk about this because of the slasher films, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th. Of all those films, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is usually said to be the most realistic. That's the one people usually say is the most real, even though it's very loosely based on Ed Gein from Wisconsin, but people do say that one's the most real. However, the only one that is really based on a true story was A Nightmare on Elm Street. And Wes Craven found some articles from the LA Times which told about people who had come from like war-torn countries, Vietnam and Cambodia, and how they had died in a mysterious way. Well, there was one article that really caught Wes Craven's attention, and it was about a boy who was, I believe, from Cambodia. He had come to the United States. His father was a physician, and this boy kept saying that someone is trying to kill me in my dreams. Every time I fall asleep, there's someone stalking me, and I'm worried they're going to kill me. Well, he wouldn't go to sleep, so his dad, who was a physician, gave him these sleeping pills, but he hid the sleeping pills, and he also got a Mr. Coffee machine with an extension cord that he hid in his closet, that he was, drinking coffee to try to stay awake. Well, eventually he fell asleep, did all this violent thrashing on the bed. His parents came in his room to see what was going on. They walked up to him, and he was dead. So that gave Wes Craven the idea of the Freddy Krueger character in A Nightmare on Elm Street. This character that enters, pretty much invades people's dreams and kills them in their dreams, and when he kills them in their dreams, they die for real. So that was the idea behind Freddy Krueger. That was the story that Nightmare on Elm Street was based on. So he then wrote this, Wes Craven wrote the script, and he then took it to Paramount. Paramount was not interested in producing the film, in making the movie. He then took it to Universal Studios. Universal was not interested because a movie had come out called Dreamscape, and Dreamscape was about dreams, and it didn't do well, and they were worried, well, maybe people just are not into movies about dreams, so they wanted nothing to do with it. Now, the interesting thing is Wes Craven then took the script to Disney, and believe it or not, Disney was interested. Kind of strange. I mean, they wanted him to edit a lot of it. They really wanted him to edit the script. I think they kind of wanted to make it kind of almost like a Scooby-Doo kind of thing or something like that. Make it more comedic. And Wes Craven refused. He then took it to a distribution company, but a distribution company that was interested in making films called New Line Cinema. And New Line Cinema was owned by an individual by the name of Robert Shea. Robert Shea had started the company in the late 60s. It was a distribution company. They also would rent out movies to college campuses. And Robert Shea was interested in financing the film, so he did. And He then got investors from the UK in on the project. They put up money, and I guess they were always trying to get investors, people to fund the film. The movie was supposed to be $700,000 to make. They went over budget. It ended up costing $1.1 million to make, but it would do $57 million at the box office, so it would become a huge success. And Nightmare on Elm Street is often called the movie that, it's called, New Line Cinema is called the studio or the house that Freddy built, because with the success of Nightmare on Elm Street, New Line Cinema was making more movies, and they would make and produce movies up until the time they were bought out by Time Warner, which was in 2008. So, anyways, the next thing they had to do involving this film was cast it. And there was a character named Glenn. Now, they chose Johnny Depp, but kind of an interesting story. Johnny Depp, I guess, came to California not to be an actor, but to be a musician in his band, to be a rock star, essentially. When, excuse me, when that wasn't working out, he then had met Nicolas Cage at a party, or through his wife or girlfriend. Somehow he had met Nicolas Cage, and Nicolas Cage said, "I think you have the look to be an actor." That's what he told Johnny Depp. And he said, "If you ever thought of acting, I could get you an agent." So Nicolas Cage got Johnny Depp an agent. The agent sent Johnny Depp out on an audition for the film. Wes Craven's daughter liked Johnny Depp. Wes Craven decided to pick Johnny Depp for the role of Glenn, and Johnny Depp's acting career was launched. I mean, that was how it started. So he plays the character Glenn. The main character, Nancy, is played by a woman by the name of Heather Langenkamp. She had done some movies at this time as well, but nothing really major. So a lot of times in these B movies, there's not really big stars in them, but there are potential stars, right? Like no one thought Johnny Depp was going to be huge. Sometimes you don't know, but he ended up becoming, an extremely famous actor. Also in this film, you had John Saxon, who, I'm not sure if he was at the end of his career necessarily. He had already done a lot of movies at this point. He had been in movies with a lot of people, including Bruce Lee when he did Enter the Dragon. But John Saxon plays kind of like a sheriff character. He also plays a similar character in the 1974 film Black Christmas. So the character he plays in Nightmare on Elm Street I thought was very similar to his Black Christmas character. So, anyways, John Saxon, and you also had Robert Englund as Freddy. Now, from what I understand, a lot of times in these slasher movies, they'll use stuntmen to play the slasher. They'll put a mask on them. With Freddy Krueger, Wes Craven wanted to go with an actual actor, someone who at least had a lot of acting experience and was regarded as a pretty good actor. And Robert Englund at the time had done a lot of movies in the 70s. He had done a movie called Stay Hungry with Jeff Bridges and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And, many more movies as well. He was in Eaten Alive, which was a Tobe Hooper film. And at this point, he had just become a star because he was in the series V, or the miniseries. There was a miniseries called V. Then there was a lull between V and the miniseries and V the series. So during that down period, Robert Englund had auditioned for the role of Freddy Krueger, and he got it. And Wes Craven was always very clear that he wanted the slasher to be able to talk. He wanted Freddy to be able to talk, and Freddy does talk. Later, the talking would kind of become more comedic in the sequel movies. But at this point, this was a pure horror film, as opposed to, the sequels where there's a lot more comedy in some of them. But anyways, Robert Englund ended up getting the part, like I said, Freddy Krueger. The filming took about 31 days or so to shoot the movie, and they used, from what I understand, all practical effects. They had a budget, so they couldn't spend too much money on effects. They did spend a lot of money on this revolving room that they had, but for the most part they didn't spend a whole lot of money on effects. But more on that in a bit. I'm gonna talk about the plot of the film. Now, there will be spoilers, but the movie's been out since 1984. I don't think I need to say that, but just to let you know, if you have never seen it, there will be spoilers in this. Anyways, movie starts out, it's about 4 teenagers, the Johnny Depp character Glenn, the Heather Langenkamp character Nancy, Tina, and another guy named Rod, who is Tina's boyfriend. And both Nancy and Tina have been saying that they've been having the same nightmare with this man who seems to been invading their dreams. And they both describe essentially the same person, the same looking person. Now, what then happens is her parents go out of town, and she invites her friends over, and Tina and her boyfriend Rod are in the room, and Tina falls asleep where she sees Freddy Krueger, and you see Freddy Krueger's arms look real long right here. His arms are real long, and he's walking toward Tina, calling her name. Then he runs toward her, and you could see Freddy could move. A lot of times in these slasher movies, the guys don't move real fast, but you could see Freddy could really move. He catches up with her, and then you see Tina, not in the dream, but in reality, and she's thrashing around. She then levitates, hits the ceiling, goes across the ceiling, falls to the ground, but you see that there's rips coming on her, something's slashing her. Then, she falls to the ground dead. And immediately the police think that her boyfriend Rod did it because he was the only one in the room with her. You could see how they would think that, but he tells the police that he's innocent. They don't buy it. But as the viewer, you buy it because you saw what happened. You saw exactly what had happened to Tina. So then they take this Rod character, they put him in a jail cell. Then Freddy comes in with this bed sheet, wraps around his neck, and he gets hung in his jail cell. So the police officers think that he had committed suicide, but this was something that Freddy had done. So then Nancy is still having these nightmares. She goes to school. She's trying to stay awake because she knows if she falls asleep, this Freddy Krueger guy will come. But then she falls asleep in class, and immediately she's walking down, in a dream, she's walking down the hall of her school. She bumps into a hall monitor played by a stunt woman, and the hall monitor says, "Where's your pass?" She walks down the hall. Then you see the hall monitor has the Freddy Krueger hand, the Freddy Krueger glove, and she tells her, no running in the hallway. Then Nancy sees that Tina's body's being dragged down the hallway toward a boiler room. She goes down into the boiler room, and that's where Freddy is. That's Freddy's domain, the boiler room. And then he comes toward Nancy, and you could see Freddy's, glove that he has. And as he gets close to Nancy, she takes her arm, puts it on a pipe, and the pipe burns her arm, and she wakes up. When she wakes up, of course, she has the burn marks. And then she leaves the classroom, goes home. Now, at this point, I want to say something about Freddy's Weapon, because it is different than other slasher weapons. A lot of times, slasher like Jason will use like a machete, or they'll use like an axe. Michael Myers will use like a knife, different weapons. But Freddy has this glove that has these like finger knives on it that are retractable. And Wes Craven said that he got this idea from like a cat. You know, cats have retractable claws. That's where that came from, and he felt that that was something that was kind of embedded in people's subconscious, because for, you know, many thousands of years ago, you know, people had to fight against cave bears and saber-toothed tigers, so seeing something with, you know, claws would be like subconsciously, at least on a subconscious level, terrifying. So he came up with that, you know, this glove that Freddy has. And the thing is it's like something like Freddy constructed. So it's like something he, you know, mechanically engineered. You know, that makes it kind of a bit more sinister than if you were to just grab a knife, or if he were to just grab an axe. Like, he premeditated this thing. Like, he premeditated this, like, glove that he would have to kill people with, essentially. So that makes it a lot more sinister, I think, than like what Michael Myers uses or what Jason uses. Anyways, getting back to the film, what then happens is Nancy is in the bathtub. It's the infamous bathtub scene. As she's falling asleep, you see Freddy Krueger's, you know, claw hand rising out of the bathtub water. And then she starts to wake up, I believe, but then she gets pulled under. And this effect was actually achieved using a swimming pool. I should add that. But, yeah, I remember she then gets out of that. And at this point, you know, she tells Glenn, the Johnny Depp character, what had happened. She tells Glenn not to fall asleep. He does fall asleep on a bed. He gets sucked into the bed, and then it's, you know, his blood shoots out of the bed. It's about 200 gallons of, you know, water with like poster paint in it was what they used for this. It was just like a geyser coming out of the bed and hitting the ceiling. So, and also there's a scene where Nancy picks up the phone, and the phone becomes like a mouth with a tongue on it. Now that's interesting, because that's not really gore. That would be classified as surrealism. And I know the people who made this film, the special effects guys, were influenced by The Shining and the surrealism that you had in The Shining. They wanted to bring it into this film. You know, they wanted to bring that sort of thing into this, like surrealism, as opposed to just having gore. There's another scene where Nancy's running up the stairs, and the stairs become real gooey, and it's hard for her to like climb up the stairs, almost like a kind of quicksand. Well, that was achieved with Bisquick. They had gotten Bisquick. If you take Bisquick and put like water on it and leave it out for like an hour, it gets real gooey. And that was what they used. So yeah, these are all practical effects. They didn't have CGI. Some of them were relatively easy to do. There's another one that looks really cool, but it was easy to do, and it's where Nancy's sleeping, and as she's sleeping, Freddy like presses up against the wall and then goes back. And that was achieved using spandex. I guess spandex is a relatively new material at this point. And so they did that using spandex. But yeah, just a lot of practical effects, things that didn't cost too much. But anyways, all this sort of accumulates to Nancy's final showdown with Freddy Krueger. Before this happens, though, Nancy's mom explains and tells Nancy that Freddy Krueger was a child murderer, and he had a trial, and due to some sort of a technicality with a warrant or something, someone screwed something up. He ended up getting let go, and he ended up being freed. So angry mob of parents trapped this Freddy Krueger in a boiler room, burned the boiler room, and Freddy had died. But what happened And they don't explain this until the 6th movie, was as he was burning up in this boiler room, he was approached by 3 dream demons, which essentially, I believe, gave him the powers of a dream demon, where he could, invade people's dreams and kill them in their dreams, and they would die for real. And I think there was also something where he feeds on their fear. So the more fear they give him, the more powerful he becomes, as Nancy finds out. And as you see with Nancy in the scene where she finally confronts Freddy, she gets all these booby traps and stuff that she sets up. There's a scene where I think a booby trap or something hits Freddy, and he falls off this stairwell. And I know it's either Wes Craven or Robert Englund. One of them thought that the stuntman must have broken his neck. However, he got right up after this and was fine. But, yeah, and then there's the scene after that where he gets set on fire. And I know he, at one point, makes one last, tries to get Nancy with his claws. And then, he just, disappears. That might have been some sort of a CGI. I'm not sure. But I don't think there was CGI in this film. CGI at this point was expensive. It wasn't widely used. From what I'm aware, there are only a few movies at this point that had CGI in it. But, yeah, so that's what happened with that. Now comes the ending. And I gotta say something about the ending. There are a lot of clashes between Wes Craven and the producer, Robert Shea. There were a lot of clashes as to how they should end the film, what sort of direction the film should go in. And what Robert Shea wanted was, he wanted an ending where the kids would get back into the car, drive off towards school, and then you would see Freddy's driving the car. Now that's terrible. And Wes Craven knew it, and he did not want that to happen. So there was a dispute and a back and forth. They both wanted a different ending. Finally, they reached a compromise where Freddy wouldn't be driving the car would kind of be driving itself, but you'd see the Freddy stripes. The car would drive off, and then Freddy's hand would grab Nancy's mom and pull her back in the door. And that was the ending they had. I did not like that ending. I mean, an otherwise good movie, the last 2 minutes of it are not good. It could have used a better ending. I always felt that. But it's, you could tell, in a sense, why Robert Shea wanted to do this, because he wanted to keep it open for a sequel. Wes Craven was not interested in a sequel film. He wanted Nightmare on Elm Street to be a standalone movie, no sequels. Well, New Line Cinema owned the rights to Freddy Krueger, not Wes Craven, from what I understand. So they had the rights to make a second movie, and they did. And Wes Craven was not involved in the second movie. I didn't like the second movie, which was Freddy's Revenge. I didn't think it was that good. But I'm not going to say too much on the sequels. It's sort of outside the scope of this video, but I'll say a little bit on them. I didn't care for the second Nightmare on Elm Street. The third one I did like, Dream Warriors. The third one I liked. It also has the song Dream Warriors by Dokken in it, which is an excellent song. That is really a well-written tune. If you haven't heard it, Dream Warriors, Dokken. Definitely check that one out if you like that kind of music. But then after that, you had Nightmare on Elm Street 4, which I liked. I remember not liking 5. 6 I liked. 6 kind of explained the whole thing with the dream demons. I thought that was a cool backstory, because in one of the Halloween movies, they do attempt to kind of explain, like, Michael Myers' backstory with the Curse of Thorn. I didn't think that really worked. I thought they should have just made it more mysterious. That's what makes a good horror movie. And I've said this before in videos, is making it more mysterious. Not all the information is given to you. Horror is different from sci-fi and fantasy, and that horror is like kind of designed to sort of like bring out and elicit like fear, bring out fear. That's what a horror film is, designed to do. And if you're given all the information about a situation, it just no longer becomes scary. So, yeah, anyways, that, Nightmare on Elm Street 6, like I said, I did like the backstory with the dream demons. I remember that part was also in 3D, so I do remember that. Then, after that, you had New Nightmares. I did see that. I don't remember that too much. Then after New Nightmares was Freddy vs. Jason. That was the most successful in both franchises, Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. It made $116 million at the box office, Freddy vs. Jason. And there was talk about Freddy vs. Jason 2. What they were actually planning on doing was they were planning on making it Freddy versus Jason versus Ash, the character from the Evil Dead movies. However, they came out with a graphic novel, and a lot of people thought that the graphic novel was like very disjointed and didn't really work. So they were kind of worried that, well, if the graphic novel's not working, maybe a film wouldn't work. So it never ended up getting made, but there was talk of making that film. I wonder how it would have turned out. But anyways, yeah, that's the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. To say another thing about Freddy Krueger and how Freddy Krueger looked, Wes Craven has talked about how he got the idea and the image of Freddy Krueger from a guy who he saw in front of his house one day that he hadn't seen before. And the guy was, or I believe it was like an apartment that Wes Craven was living in. And the guy was wearing like a fedora hat, and he was staring right at Wes Craven. Thought the guy was scary. Wes Craven left, but he came back 2 minutes later to see if the guy was still there. He was still staring at the window. So he kind of got some of Freddy Krueger's image from that. I know Wes Craven has also said he didn't want Freddy Krueger to wear a mask, like Jason or Michael Myers. Instead he has, this like scar tissue because he had been burned. But, yeah, so anyways, getting back to it, as far as, like Johnny Depp, he would go on to huge career. Robert Englund, this really opened a lot of doors for him, and he's still a working actor to this day. I know he does a lot of horror conventions. He's a very interesting guy to listen to, Robert Englund. He's one of those people that are just so passionate to talk about movies. Like Quentin Tarantino is that way too. I could listen to Quentin Tarantino talk about films all day. Same with Robert Englund. He's just an interesting guy to listen to. If you come across any of his interviews that he has online or podcasts that he's done. But anyways, yeah, that's my video. I did want to talk about it. I did want to talk about this film. And if you watched this video on A Nightmare on Elm Street, I thank you for watching. Have a good night.